Okay, moving further, how many of you are up for a small test? So I'm going to give you three statements and you have to guess whether these three statements are compliments or criticism. Here they are. You never looked better. I never thought it would be like this. I shall lose no time reading your paper. What do you think about these three statements? Pause the video, think about them and tell me. Of course, you can't tell me, but I'm just saying. Now, when you look at the statements, you never looked better. I never thought it would be like this. I shall lose no time reading your paper. They look like, these statements look like criticisms, negative statements. But let's read them in a context. So, now let's read it. The outfit suits you so well, you never looked better. It was so wonderful, I never thought it would be like this. You are such a fine writer, I shall lose no time reading your paper. Now you see, when we looked at only these three statements without the context, they looked like criticisms. But then when we read them in proper context, they are actually compliments, not criticisms. Now, the reason why I am sharing this with you is, from here onwards, this is what exactly Esther Dhanraj does. She takes the words of Paul, Jerome, and Augustine, and Eusebius, and gives those words different meanings. So let's see what she says about Paul. Regarding Apostle Paul, this is what she says.
Our first confessor is Paul of the New Testament. There are 14 books in the New Testament ascribed to Paul under the category of epistles. They are claimed to have been written around the mid-1st century, even before the biographies of Jesus were written down. At least half of those that are ascribed to Paul have now been proven to be forgeries of later centuries. Many historians now consider the epistles of Paul as fake, making those writings the biggest fraud in all of human history.
Okay, she said at least half of those that are ascribed to Paul have now been proven to be forgeries and of later centuries. Now she got into a dilemma here. That is, I wouldn't call this a dilemma, but something called a paradox. What is that paradox? It is called liar's paradox. What is liar's paradox? Liar's paradox is, let me tell you what it is. If a liar says that I am a liar, if a liar says I am a liar, did he tell the truth? Because he cannot be telling the truth because he is a liar. But the statement is true that he is a liar. But if the statement is true, then how come he is a liar? Think about it. Now, what this liar's paradox has got to do with Esther Dhanraj and her quoting of Paul? I'll tell you what. How this is related. She said just now that at least half of those that are ascribed to Paul, these epistles, now have been proven to be forgeries and later centuries. So let me, okay. This is, say, Paul's letters, epistles. These epistles are forgeries. So we cannot trust anything that these epistles are saying. So how are you going to prove that Apostle Paul confessed to the truth that he lied or committed fraud or forgery? Because we cannot trust these forgeries now. So how are we going to do that? What is your source? That is liar's paradox. Either Esther Dhanraj should believe that these epistles are true, only then the words of Paul can be quoted against Paul. If epistles are false, then how can we be sure that these epistles are saying the truth about Paul? That's why I quoted Liar's paradox. But anyways, let's go ahead. Let her come out of this paradox. I don't know how she is going to come out, but let her come out of it. But we will move ahead and see. I believe that these epistles are true, so I am going to respond to her questions. She said, now, the mark of a scholar is to quote mark of a scholar or a debater is to quote references. When she said at least half of those epistles that are ascribed to Paul have now been proven to be forgeries of later centuries. Who proved them? According to which scholar? Who said it? One of the problems that I encounter whenever I watch her videos is that she doesn't provide references. She said, according to these many wealth of literature, according to so and so, according to so and so. But then when it comes to giving precise reference, she doesn't. But anyway, some areas she does give some references. We are going to look at those references also, but majority of her videos lack evidences or references. For example, DeWitt's, we don't see any reference. She in fact quotes some other website, the words of some other person, not DeWitt's references. Anyways, she quotes, this is what she says about Apostle Paul.
In the context of fraud, Paul went on record admitting to have been crafty to capture unsuspecting believers through deception. This admission is preserved in a book in the Bible called 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the second part of verse 16, which says, "Being crafty, I caught you with guile."
Now, she quoted 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 16 and she said, "Being crafty, I caught you with guile." In the context of fraud, Paul went on record admitting to have been crafty to capture unsuspecting believers through deception. This admission is preserved in a book in the Bible called 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 16. Now my first question is, if the epistles are forgeries or they cannot be trusted, then how can you trust this verse is telling the truth about Paul? That is question for you, Esther. You need to answer this, but let me answer this question that you raised. Now here, the context is about Paul being paid or offered money by the Corinthians. Paul wasn't accepting money or monetary help from the Corinthian church. One of the things about Apostle Paul is that wherever he is going to minister to the people or preaching the gospel, he doesn't lay burden on the people. He works day and night. He works and he earns his own bread and eats. He doesn't lay burden on the people. You can read his epistles, whether it is Thessalonians or Corinthians, Ephesians. Yes, some churches forcefully helped him. That's a different story, but this is his habit. He doesn't lay burden on the people. Now, the same thing was happening here. He was not putting burden. He was not taking monetary help from the Corinthians. But there are some Corinthians who were telling that this Paul, though he is not taking money from us, somehow, through some means, through his disciples, somehow he is taking our money. That is one of the allegations some people in Corinthian church alleged about Paul. So, if we read the whole context, we will understand. For the context, she quoted only 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 16. But if we read 2 Corinthians from chapter 12 verse 14 to 19, we will understand the context. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 14 says, "Now I am ready to visit you for the third time, and I will not be a burden to you. Because what I want is not your possessions, not your money, but you. After all, children should not have to save up for their parents, but parents for their children." Now, what Paul is saying is that I am your spiritual father. I will not take your savings. Instead, I am supposed to leave savings for you. So, I don't want your possessions. I don't want your money. Instead, verse 15, he says, "So I will very gladly spend for you everything I have." He is saying, I don't want your money, but I am willing to spend everything that I have for you and expend myself as well. If I love you more, will you love me less? So he is saying, I love you so much, the Corinthian churches, that I don't want your money. Instead, I will spend whatever I have. Verse 16 says, "Be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you." Now listen to this. "Yet, crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery." Now this is a statement he is quoting because one of the persons in the Corinthian church said it. So he is quoting those people. If you read NIV translation or ESV translation, it says, "You say, yet crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery." But anyways, this is he is taunting. It's a sarcastic statement. He is saying it because this was the statement people used against Paul. Verse 17 says, "Did I exploit you through any of the men I sent you? I urged Titus to go to you, and I sent our brother with him. Titus did not exploit you, did he? Did we not walk in the same footsteps by the same Spirit?" In the whole context, it is clear the words that he used over there, he is using them sarcastically because one of the church members or some people alleged that Paul caught them in trickery and somehow he is taking their money. So, further, the plain reading of the scripture shows that this is not a confession that Paul committed fraud. Instead, the whole context reveals that the individuals or some people accused Paul that though he doesn't take their money, but somehow secretly he is taking from them. So read the context and see whether it is a confession of fraud or forgery. Second account, this is what she says.
In 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verses 20 and 22, Paul openly glories in the affirmation of practicing imposture and dishonesty. He says, "For unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men." If Paul had not used the words, "that I might gain the Jews," probably Paul could have been absolved of trickery and disguise with intention to deceive.
Here, she says, Paul is practicing, he is affirming that of practicing being an impostor. Who is an impostor? First of all, impostor is the one who pretends to be somebody who actually is not. But when you look at the statement, "For unto Jews I become a Jew," Paul will be an impostor if he is not a Jew in the first place. But it is true that Paul is a Jew and he is from the tribe of Benjamin, an Israelite, a Pharisee of Pharisees. He says, and he studied under Gamaliel. So he is a Jew by birth. So where is the question of being an impostor here? Now, again, when he says, I might, to the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. Now the thing is that he considered weak so that he may depend upon God for strength. Now, the whole statement here is of an empathy. That is, empathetically, he is trying to be in the shoes of those people, understanding them so that he can present Christ to them accordingly. Now, if he was not a Jew and pretending to be a Jew, then you can rightly call him an impostor. And he always considered himself weak so that he may gain strength from the Lord. So I don't think you can say he was committing anything. He is trying to be an impostor here. So who is an impostor? Let me give you an interesting story. For those people, when you look at Padma Purana, 54th chapter of Srishti Kanda, this is a section on creation of the Padma Purana, which contains 6 books, total consisting at least 50,000 Sanskrit metrical verses. Now, there is an account here. That is, Indra is so fascinated with the beauty of Ahalya. Now, Indra wants to rape Ahalya. He comes down as an impostor in the disguise of a sage. And then, in the absence of Gautama, her husband, who goes out for his daily rituals, and then he rapes her. When Gautama realizes something bad was happening, he comes home. Then when Indra realizes that Gautama came, he immediately transforms himself into a cat. Tries to escape, but Gautama catches him and curses him that there will be 1,000 vaginas on his body. Who is an impostor? That's an impostor for you. But anyway, I didn't mean to hurt any Hindu, but since you spoke about the impostor, that's an impostor for you. Moving ahead, here is the third case of Paul. She tries to portray that Paul is a liar. This is what she says.
Paul's most important admission appears in Romans chapter 3 verse 7. He says, "For if the truth of God hath more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner?" In simple terms, Paul is saying, if my fraud is bringing glory to God, then how come it is termed falsehood and treated as a sin? And why am I judged as a sinner?
Is Paul saying that he is a fraud or confessing committing fraudulent practice? Let's read verse 5, 6, 7, and this is what Paul says. Though she used the King James version, I am reading from ESV version. But if our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us? I speak in a human way. Verse 6, by no means. For then, how could God judge the world? But if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? Now, for those people and for Esther, if you don't know what is happening here, Paul utilizes sporadically throughout the letter and his epistles, there is a literary style that is called a diatribe. Diatribe means the person it is an ancient style of writing. The ancient authors, while they were writing, they imagine it's an imaginary dialogue which is happening with their student or an opponent They assume an opponent, they assume their interlocutor, possible questions that the interlocutor or the student or the debater would throw at Paul or somebody. They will assume the questions and then respond to it. From verse 5, 6, 7. But if our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us? Verse 6, Paul answers, by no means. For then, how could God judge the world? Again, verse 7, but if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? Now, in the whole of the epistle of Romans, while Paul was writing, if you look at chapter 1, 2 and 3, in chapter 3, he is trying to tell the Jews that though you are God's chosen people, though God had given you law, but you are inexcusable because God will judge you too. According to God's standards, even you are sinners. That's what Paul is telling the Jews. So obviously a Jew will say that we are chosen people. How can God judge us? But anyway, we are chosen people. Even if we are sinning, by God showing grace on us, he will be proven that how gracious he is. So in that case, now look at verse 7. But if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? So here, this is not Paul's word. It is the interlocutors, the debaters, the Jews who would counter question Paul. So he is assuming that question and answering it. So this style of writing is called diatribe. Now, according to one scholar, he says, the literary device of an imaginary dialogue with a student or opponent. Elements of this style include frequent questions posed by the author to his conversation partner or by the conversation partner, empathetic rejections of possible objections to a line of argument using me genoito, may it never be, and the direct address of one's conversation partner or opponent. So this is an imaginary conversation that is happening while Paul was writing this epistle Romans between him and the imaginary Jews or Jew, where they will be debating with Paul, and Paul way ahead providing the answers. So this is a style, a literary style which was adopted in those days. If you look at Plato's writings, you see there are long conversations between Socrates and his students or interlocutors. In the ancient times, this is the literary device that they used to write their writings or their discussions. Now next she says that she quotes 2 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 6 and 7.
There are other trickeries that Paul introduced to Christianity when it was still in the cult stage. These trickeries were accepted as doctrines when the cult was given the status of a religion, because the trickery suited the church's agenda of usurping power and acquiring wealth. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 verses 6 and 7, Paul explains how much should be given and with what attitude. Paul makes it appear as if giving donations was purely for the benefit of the believer and that the church gained nothing from it. He said that blessings of God are directly proportional to the amount the believer gave. Basically, he's saying, you get what you pay for. By this definition, the richer a person is, the bigger the blessing he received from God.
And the verse, blessings of God are directly proportional to the amount the believer gave. And she infers that basically he is saying you get what you pay for. By this definition, the richer a person is, the bigger the blessing he received from God. This is totally wrong. That's not what Christianity says. A widow, a poor lady, came to the temple of God, and all she gave was 2 little coins. But God said, or Jesus said, she gave more than anybody else. Now here you see there was no proportional here, that God always looks at the heart of the giver, not the amount that was given. Secondly, Paul was collecting the funds not for himself. In Jerusalem, the believers were going through persecution, troubles and trials, and Paul was collecting funds, so that Paul was collecting funds from the Gentiles, non-Jew churches, to support the Jewish churches in Jerusalem where they can be helped. Now, this is something that Paul was collecting so that it could be sent to Jerusalem. So nowhere it suggests that the more you give, God will bless you more. No, the blessings are not proportionate to the amount. The blessings are proportionate to the condition of your heart. Do we have evidence here that Paul committed fraud or forgery? Any evidence? I don't see any evidence whether Paul committed fraud or forgery in his own statements. But by the way, don't forget the liar's paradox. If the epistles of Paul are fake, they cannot be trusted. How can you use these statements to prove that Paul confessed to fraudulent practices or committed forgery? The whole epistles should be rejected. If all the epistles are rejected, then where is your proof to prove that Paul committed fraud or forgery? You still lack over there. You decide. Either the epistles of Paul are true, only then these statements can be used. But even if those statements can be used, the explanation I gave in the right context, nowhere it suggests that Paul committed fraud. But then if epistles are wrong or fake, then you have no grounds to start with to accuse Paul. You decide what you want to do.
You have been weighed.
You have been measured.
And you absolutely
have been found wanting.
Welcome to the new world. God save you, if it is right that he should do so.